At my own birthday, my daughter looked me in the eye and called me stupid for trusting the nurse who cared for me. My grandchildren watched in silence as she stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the house. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply changed my will. When she came back and found out, her scream rattled the walls. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Helen Carter, and for most of my life, silence was the language I knew best. I learned to carry it like a second skin during my marriage to Daniel, a man whose cruelty was never loud enough to draw attention, but sharp enough to cut me down day after day. His anger didn't need shouting. It lived in his sighs, his disapproving glances, his manipulative pauses at the dinner table when I dared to breathe too loudly or disagree. For years, I told myself enduring was love, that keeping peace was a duty, until the day it nearly broke me. Walking away from that house, from the years I'd invested, felt like dragging chains through mud. I was in my late 40s, bones tired, heart bruised. I left not just for myself, but for Rachel, my only daughter. She was in her 20s then, full of potential, chasing college dreams. I believed she would understand that leaving Daniel was not weakness, but survival. I thought she'd be proud. Instead, her eyes turned cold, her voice sharper than her father's had ever been. You gave up on us, she said. You broke everything. The words sank into me deeper than any of Daniel's quiet cruelties. I had imagined freedom would taste like fresh air. Instead, it burned like smoke in my lungs. Still, I stayed close. I couldn't let Rachel drift too far. She married young, stumbled into adulthood with a ring and responsibilities heavier than she was ready for. When her marriage collapsed, she was left with two small children, Ethan and Lily, and a career that consumed what little strength she had left. That was when I stepped in, not because she asked, but because I couldn't bear to watch her drown. I moved into the small guest house behind her home, ready to anchor her world. My days became a blur of school drop-offs, soccer practices, grocery runs, birthday candles, and midnight fevers. I held them all, every scraped knee, every nightmare, every whispered secret of my grandchildren. My arms were where they found safety. My presence was the thread stitching their lives together. I convinced myself this was what love meant, giving without question, holding without complaint, standing quietly in the background so someone else could shine. And for a while, that belief sustained me. But Rachel hardened with time instead of softening. Where I expected gratitude, I met only resentment. She snapped at me in front of the children, rolled her eyes as though I were a relic cluttering her modern world. You baby them too much, she would say. They'll never grow up right with you hovering. Her words stung, but worse were the moments I overheard when she thought I wasn't listening. On the phone with friends, her laughter like glass breaking. My mom, she's basically free childcare with opinions. What can I do? I would stand in the kitchen then, smiling too quietly, pretending my chest wasn't collapsing inward. But it was. Each careless word, each dismissal chipped at me, though I never showed it. I told myself that the love of Ethan and Lily was enough to carry me through. They ran into my arms after school, curled up beside me during storms, whispered their small fears into my ear because they trusted I would never betray them. And for them, I stayed. But Rachel never looked at me as her children did. To her, I was not a mother with a story, not a woman who had once fought for her own life. I was a shadow, a presence expected but rarely acknowledged, a body that cooked, cleaned, kept her world spinning. A convenience, not a person. I began to wonder late at night when the house grew still if she ever truly saw me at all. Then came the change. It began as a heaviness, not simple tiredness, but a bone-deep exhaustion that hollowed me out. Crossing the kitchen left me breathless. The walk from porch to garden became a climb I could barely manage. My hands trembled when I tried to pour tea. The weight slid off my body, leaving me smaller, weaker, a shell of the woman who once carried everyone else. The doctor's words were soft, almost apologetic, but nothing could soften the blow. Cancer. Aggressive. The kind that didn't wait politely for you to make peace. I walked out of that office with silence heavier than anything I had ever carried. For 3 days, I kept it to myself, terrified not of dying, but of how Rachel would react. Would she see me as another inconvenience, another burden she hadn't signed up for? When I finally told her, she didn't even set her phone down. "Oh, well, we'll figure something out," she said, her tone flat, already distracted. Later that week, she added almost casually, "You should probably hire a nurse, Mom. I really don't have time for all that." All that, as though my illness was laundry piled too high. That was the moment I stopped pretending. Rachel had no intention of standing beside me through this part of the storm. To her, my pain was just another problem to delegate. So I picked up the phone, my hand trembling, and called for help. I didn't know it then, but that decision, made in silence and grief, would unravel everything I thought I knew about family, love, and legacy. It was the first step toward a truth I had hidden from myself for too long. The nurse arrived on a Wednesday morning, though at first I didn't know what to expect. I had imagined someone brisk, clinical, maybe a little detached. Instead, Julia Hayes stepped onto my porch with a clipboard in hand and a smile that wasn't forced. She looked like someone who had seen enough of life to know how to tread gently, yet strong enough not to flinch when others did. She was 38, with chestnut hair cropped short and eyes that carried warmth without pity. "Helen Carter?" she asked politely. "Helen Tianin," I corrected softly. She nodded as though we had already settled into familiarity. And from that moment, something shifted. She didn't fill the air with rehearsed cheer. She didn't treat me like a fragile artifact or a duty. She simply saw me, a woman, tired and frightened, who needed help without losing her dignity. That first week was simple. Julia organized my medications, prepared meals, handled light cleaning, and took me to my appointments. But she noticed more than the tasks on her list. She saw when my hands trembled before I admitted it. She placed warm socks at the foot of my bed before I even asked. She refilled the bird feeder outside the kitchen window because, as she put it, the view might cheer you up. It had been years since someone thought of me like that. Years since anyone had cared without expectation. When Rachel came by to visit, she didn't ask how I was doing. She leaned against the door frame, scrolling her phone, her voice clipped as she asked, "So how's the nurse?" "She has a name," I replied gently. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Fine, how's Julia?" "She's wonderful," I answered, maybe too firmly. "She takes good care of me." Rachel didn't respond. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and moments later, she left without a goodbye, her coffee cup still half full. The contrast was stark. Julia's presence filled the silence with steadiness, while Rachel's visits carried only tension. Julia listened when I spoke, even about things that had no relevance to her life. I told her about the garden I used to keep, how roses once bloomed along the fence before my body betrayed me. Instead of nodding politely, she said, "Tell me which flowers you'd choose. You've got the vision, I've got the hands." I found myself smiling in ways I hadn't for years. It unsettled Rachel. She began asking sharper questions during her short visits. "How many hours does she work? Does she cook for you too? Do you really need her here every day?" None of it was concern. It was surveillance, as though Julia were trespassing on territory Rachel had long since abandoned. One evening, Julia sat beside me as I waited for test results that would determine the next steps. My thoughts were tangled in dread, but her voice was steady when she said, "You've carried a lot of people for a long time, haven't you?" I looked at her, startled, then nodded. "You don't have to keep holding everyone up," she added softly. "Let someone hold you for once." I cried that night, not quiet tears, but the deep, breaking sobs that come when you finally admit how much you've endured alone. Julia didn't look away. She didn't rush me. She just stayed. It was around then that I realized something. The more Julia cared for me, the more I saw how little care I had ever allowed myself to receive. Not just during the illness, but before, during my marriage, after my divorce, even with Rachel, especially with Rachel. I had mistaken endurance for strength, sacrifice for love. Julia was teaching me another language, one of gentleness and presence. The turning point came when Rachel accused me of naivety. She laughed without humor, warning me not to be stupid about my money. She implied Julia's kindness had strings attached, though Julia had never asked me for a single thing. That word, stupid, settled heavy in my chest. For decades, I had held my tongue, accepted the role of silent caretaker, convinced myself that being needed was the same as being loved. But as Rachel's voice echoed in my mind, I realized I wasn't stupid. I was tired. I was done being invisible. The next morning, with my body aching and my hands trembling, I called Thomas Grant, the lawyer who had once guided me through my divorce. His voice carried surprise when he heard mine, older now, wearier. "It's been a long time, Mrs. Carter," he said. "Please," I replied. "Just Helen." We arranged to meet. I didn't tell Rachel. Julia drove me to his office, her presence steady but never pressing. She adjusted the car's seat warmer, handed me my scarf, and said only, "Call if you need me." I wanted to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. She seemed to understand anyway. Sitting across from Thomas felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the kind where falling and flying feel almost the same. His hair had gone gray, his shoulders heavier with years, but his eyes carried the same measured kindness I remembered. He leafed through my old documents, then looked up. "You never updated your will after your divorce," he noted. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." When I told him my decision, he hesitated. "Are you sure this isn't a small change?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Rachel. It was about truth. I could no longer pretend our relationship was anything other than what it had become. A transaction where love was always rationed, where my worth was measured only by what I could provide. That day, I named Ethan and Lily as equal beneficiaries. I set up trusts for their education, ensuring their futures. And I added Julia, not because she asked, but because she deserved it. She had given me dignity when no one else did. Signing those papers didn't make me feel vengeful. It made me feel whole. I walked out of that office with a strange calm in my chest, a quiet strength I had not felt in decades. But I knew that peace wouldn't last. Rachel would learn soon enough. And when she did, the storm would come. Sometimes the most unexpected people arrive in our lives and show us what love was supposed to look like all along. Julia Hayes wasn't just a nurse who monitored my pills and drove me to appointments. She was the first person in years who made me feel seen. And once I tasted that, there was no going back. If you've ever been invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered whether you mattered, stay with me. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so others can find their own strength in it too. Julia's care went beyond medical charts and checklists. She paid attention in ways Rachel never had. She noticed when my breathing grew shallow, when fatigue dimmed my eyes, when silence weighed heavier than words. She brought me blankets before the chill set in, filled the house with the small kindnesses I hadn't realized I'd been starved of. One afternoon, we sat together on the porch as the wind tugged at the branches of the old maple tree. I told her about my garden, the way I once coaxed roses into bloom along the fence, how lilies opened like soft lanterns in the early morning light. My voice faltered when I admitted I couldn't tend them anymore. Julia didn't flinch. She smiled and said, "You tell me what to plant, and I'll be your hands. You still have the vision, Helen." It startled me how those words softened the ache inside me. For years, I had been told I was too much, too present, too protective, too involved. And here she was, telling me I was enough. Rachel, however, bristled at Julia's presence. Her visits grew sharper, her eyes scanning the room as though Julia were an intruder. One afternoon, she crossed her arms and asked, "How many hours is she working now? Does she really need to be here every day?" "She's not just here for me," I said carefully. "She's here with me." Rachel scoffed, sipping her iced coffee like the conversation bored her. "Well, just don't be naive. People always have motives." That word, naive, landed like a stone. After decades of sacrifice, after every night I'd held her children through fevers, after every birthday cake baked in silence, she still reduced me to a fool. Later that evening, Julia found me staring at the framed photos of Ethan and Lily on the shelf. "Rough day?" she asked. "They're all rough lately," I admitted, my voice cracking. Julia didn't push. She simply nodded, folding laundry as though steadying the air itself. It was the first time in years I felt permission to stop pretending. The next morning, with a resolve that trembled in my hands but not in my heart, I called Thomas Grant. I told him I wanted to change everything. My will, my legacy, my voice in this world. For too long, I had confused proximity with love, obligation with loyalty. I would no longer allow my silence to be inherited. At the lawyer's office, the decision poured from me like water breaking through a dam. Ethan and Lily would be provided for equally. Julia would inherit the house and savings, not because she asked, but because she gave me something priceless. Dignity. Thomas looked at me steadily. Helen, this is a profound change. Are you certain? I am, I answered, surprised by the firmness in my tone. When the papers were signed, I left the office with a sense of control I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't about punishing Rachel. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about telling the truth with ink and signatures. That love was not measured by blood, but by presence. The shift inside me was subtle but unstoppable. I held myself straighter, spoke with fewer apologies. Julia noticed it first. You seem lighter, she said one evening as we sat in the quiet hum of the living room. I made a decision, I whispered. For the first time in a long time, it feels like it was mine. She smiled, her eyes steady. Then maybe it's the right one. But as peace settled into me, I could already feel the storm gathering. Rachel was not blind. She sensed the distance widening, the control slipping. Her visits carried an edge, her questions sharpened to suspicion. She's spoiling the kids to get on your good side, Rachel accused one afternoon, her tone dripping with disdain. Why would she need to get on my good side? I asked quietly. Rachel faltered, then masked it with another scoff. Just don't be stupid about your money, Mom. That word again, stupid. It struck like a slap, but I didn't flinch this time. I stood, bracing myself against the table, and answered with more strength than I expected. Julia hasn't asked me for a single thing, Rachel. Not once. And in case you haven't noticed, she's the only one treating me like I matter. Her eyes flickered. Hurt, anger, disbelief. But she covered it quickly and left without another word. The door slammed behind her, echoing like a verdict. That night, as Julia folded towels in the laundry room, she glanced up and asked, "Rough day?" I nodded. They've all been rough, but this one left a mark. She didn't push. She just folded another towel, her quiet presence anchoring me to the earth. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. And more than that, I felt worthy of being seen. It was a fragile piece, but it was mine. I didn't know how long it would last. I only knew this: the truth was already written, and the storm waiting outside my door could no longer silence me. Rachel's visits became less about me and more about monitoring. She walked into the house with clipped heels, her eyes darting over Julia's movements, her presence radiating tension. Where Julia carried quiet strength, Rachel carried suspicion, and it filled every corner of the room. One afternoon, I was at the kitchen table, hands trembling as I tried to butter toast. Julia reached for the knife gently, her touch steady, her presence calm. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms folded, her gaze sharp. "She's really here every day?" she asked, her voice deliberately casual but her eyes hard. "Yes," I replied simply. Rachel let out a short laugh, not of amusement but of mockery. "You're being dramatic, Mom. I mean, I know you're sick, but she's not family." The word hit harder than it should have. Not family. I turned toward her slowly, my voice quiet but edged with a truth I'd carried for too long. No, she's not family. She's something better. She's present. The silence that followed was heavy. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. She grabbed her purse and walked out without another look, the slam of the door reverberating like a storm inside my chest. Julia didn't comment. She didn't need to. That evening, she found me sitting alone on the porch, staring at the fading light. She handed me a cup of tea, warm, fragrant with chamomile. "She always talks to you like that?" she asked gently. "Yes," I admitted. "Always." The words hung between us, thick with years of unspoken pain. Julia placed her hand over mine. No speeches, no promises, just steady warmth. For the first time, I let myself say the truth aloud, and I let it stay in the air without retreating into excuses. Rachel's unease only grew as Julia's presence deepened in my life. I could feel it in the way her visits bristled with unspoken accusations. She asked Ethan and Lily pointed questions about Julia, her voice sharp enough for me to overhear. Does she cook for Nana every night? Does she sleep in the house? Does she use Nana's car? It wasn't care, it was interrogation. One evening, I confronted Rachel in the kitchen after she pressed Ethan for answers. Why are you questioning my grandchildren about Julia? I asked, my voice steady though my heart pounded. Her eyes flickered, first guilt, then annoyance, and finally defensiveness. I'm just trying to protect you, Mom. People like her, they take advantage of people like you. I met her gaze, my voice even, each word carved from the stone of years. Julia has shown me more kindness, more respect in a month than you have in 10 years. Rachel scoffed, rolling her eyes as though the truth I'd spoken was nothing but foolishness. She's being paid. And you? I asked quietly. What's your excuse? Her face froze. Her jaw tightened. The silence that followed was more damning than any argument. She muttered something under her breath and left, her footsteps sharp against the floor. That night, as Julia folded laundry in the next room, she didn't ask for details. She only looked at me with steady eyes that said she understood more than words could explain. I realized then that the storm between Rachel and me was no longer a matter of misunderstanding. It was truth finally coming to the surface, and Rachel hated it. Days later, I sat across from Thomas Grant in his office, my hands shaking as I signed the new documents. The decision felt heavier than paper, heavier than ink, but it wasn't revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about finally telling the truth in a language Rachel could never dismiss, legal, binding, undeniable. My grandchildren, Ethan and Lily, would receive equal shares through education trusts. Julia would inherit the house and my savings. Rachel was left with nothing, not out of spite, but out of clarity. She had treated me as a convenience, not a mother. She had seen me as an obligation, not a person. And now the truth was written, sealed, witnessed. When I left the office, I felt lighter, almost free. The Oregon air was cold that day, but it filled my lungs with something close to hope. Julia drove me home, her hands steady on the wheel, her silence gentle. I wanted to tell her what I had done, but I kept it close for now, holding it like a fragile ember inside me. That evening, she caught me staring at the photos on the mantel. Ethan grinning with missing teeth, Lily clutching a doll, Rachel on her wedding day. I used to see beauty in that photo of her in white lace. Now all I saw was distance, a chasm I could never bridge. Thinking about them? Julia asked softly. I always am, I whispered. She nodded, not pressing, not demanding, just being there. And in that moment, I realized the truth with startling clarity. Love wasn't about blood or obligation or shared history. It was about presence, about respect, about kindness. And Julia had given me that when my own daughter had not. The storm wasn't over. If anything, it was only beginning. But for the first time in years, I knew which side of the storm I was standing on. Some storms don't begin with thunder. They build in whispers, in sharp glances, in words so casual they sound harmless until they pierce your chest. That was how Rachel's war began. She didn't come at me with fists or fury. She came with suspicion, with poison disguised as concern. And if you've ever faced someone determined to twist your truth into their story, keep listening. What happened next nearly tore everything apart. And if this resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like mine alive. Rachel's visits turned darker. She no longer came to ask how I was doing, but to demand answers about Julia. She circled like a hawk, watching every interaction, her voice clipped with judgment. The kids say she drives them to school sometimes, Rachel remarked one afternoon, arms crossed, leaning against the fridge like a prosecutor ready to deliver her case. She offered, I said evenly. It helps me, and they like her. Her laugh was sharp, without joy. Of course they do. She's probably spoiling them to get on your good side. I stared at my daughter, weary of the constant battle. Why would she need to get on my good side? Julia hasn't asked me for anything. Not once, Rachel's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. People have motives, Mom. Don't be so naive. That word again, naive. It stung worse than any insult because it dismissed everything I had endured, everything I had carried for her and her children. My hands trembled as I stood, steadying myself on the table. Julia treats me like I matter, Rachel. That's more than I can say about you. For a brief moment, I saw it in her eyes, hurt, maybe even recognition. But she buried it under anger, muttered something about my money, and stormed out. That night, the silence in the house was heavy, broken only by Julia's quiet movements in the laundry room. She looked up from folding towels, her voice gentle. Rough day? They've all been rough lately, I whispered. But this one cut deep. She didn't press, she simply nodded, her presence as steady as the walls around me. Days later, Rachel returned, this time sharper, more desperate. She questioned Julia directly in front of me. Do you really need to be here every day? Isn't this a little much for someone who's just doing a job? Julia's calm never faltered. She didn't rise to the bait. She simply continued with her work, leaving the words to hang in the air like smoke. Rachel turned back to me, her voice sharp. You're being dramatic. She is not family. I met her gaze, my voice low but steady. No, she's not. She's better. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Rachel's jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened with something that wasn't sorrow but rage. She spun on her heel and left, the door slamming so hard it rattled the frame. Julia found me on the couch, my hands trembling. Do you want me to step away for a while? She asked softly. Give things some space? I shook my head firmly. No, this is my home. You are not the problem. Her eyes softened, relief flickering across her face. Then I'll stay. The weeks that followed were filled with tension. Rachel began whispering to neighbors, painting herself as the abandoned daughter and Julia as a manipulator. I heard their murmurs when I went to the pharmacy, caught the pitying glances at the grocery store. They pitied Rachel, not me. And Julia bore the brunt of their gossip, avoiding the front yard, retreating into the quiet corners of the house. One evening I found her in the laundry room, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. This is my mess, I told her. No, she whispered. I'm the one being accused, and I can't even defend myself. I placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. You don't have to. I know the truth. But the truth wasn't enough to shield her from the weight of lies. Even Ethan and Lily began to carry Rachel's poison in their eyes. They still came to me, but with hesitation, as though they weren't sure who to believe. One evening, Ethan sat beside me on the porch, his voice small. Mom says Julia's stealing our house. The words cut deeper than any blade. I forced a steady voice. Julia isn't stealing anything, sweetheart. She's taking care of me. He looked down at his shoes, uncertain, and changed the subject. My heart broke a little more. That night, Julia brought lemonade to the porch, saw the tension, and retreated quietly. She didn't need me to explain. She already knew. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired. Maybe I should leave. If I go, maybe she'll back off. Maybe the kids will come back. No, I said sharply, surprising even myself. You don't get to be punished for being kind. Her eyes filled with unshed tears. But I am. I realized then that Rachel's war wasn't against me alone. It was against anyone who dared to love me in the way she refused to. She couldn't bear to see someone else give what she withheld. She couldn't stand that I had chosen differently. The storm was no longer distant. It was here, breaking over my house, my heart, my family. And there was no going back. Rachel did not retreat. She retaliated. The first strike came in a plain white envelope tucked into my mailbox. A notice from a local probate attorney, a formal request to verify the validity of my new will. Days later, another letter arrived. A petition claiming I had been unduly influenced, coerced into leaving my estate to Julia. Julia found the paperwork first. Her face drained of color as she carried it inside, her hands trembling. Did you know about this? She whispered, though she already knew the answer. I shook my head slowly. I expected a storm, I said quietly. I didn't expect it to come so fast. She set the papers down on the table as though they burned her skin. She's trying to erase me. She's trying to control me, I corrected. I called Thomas Grant immediately. His voice was steady but tinged with weariness. She doesn't have a case, Helen. You were of sound mind when you signed. There's no evidence of coercion. But it will get messy. Messy. The word clung to me like smoke. Rachel did not stop at legal petitions. She called relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, spinning her story of betrayal. She painted herself as the abandoned daughter, the victim of a manipulative outsider. She whispered to neighbors, her voice dripping with false concern, "I'm just worried about my mom. That nurse is living there full time, you know. She changed the will, gave everything to her." The pity wasn't directed toward me. It was poured onto Rachel as though she were the one discarded. I saw it in the eyes of people at the pharmacy, heard it in the hushed tones of the grocery store. Even at the oncology clinic, the nurse hesitated as she asked, "Do you have family supporting you through this?" Julia carried the weight of their whispers more heavily than I did. She avoided the front yard, stopped chatting with the mailman, kept her head down in places she once moved freely. One night I found her sitting in the laundry room, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "I never wanted this," she murmured. "I didn't come here for money, Helen. I just wanted to help." I reached for her hand, frail but steady. "You've given me more than you know. Don't let her lies take that away from you." She blinked away tears, but her voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like I'm being punished for it?" I had no answer. That night, the silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It pressed against the walls, heavy with everything Rachel had unleashed. When she returned, it was without warning. The door creaked open, her heels striking the floor with the force of a storm. Julia was in the kitchen, her back turned, when Rachel stepped into the living room and fixed her gaze on me. "You don't see it, do you?" she demanded. "She's isolating you. She's made you believe I'm the enemy." I met her eyes, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You made yourself the enemy, Rachel." Her face twisted. "I am your daughter, and I am your mother," I answered softly. "A mother you've taken for granted your entire adult life." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "She's manipulating you." "She's caring for me," I said firmly. "And there's a difference with that kamabano." Rachel's voice rose, sharp as glass. "You're seriously leaving her everything after all I've done for you?" I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling under the weight of both illness and rage. "You never asked what I needed, not once. You only saw what you thought you were owed." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't sorrow. They were fury. She spat the words like venom. "You'll regret this." Then she turned and slammed the door so hard the frame shook. Julia stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her eyes filled with quiet worry. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She simply crossed the room and sat beside me. "I think she hates me," I said finally, my voice raw. "She doesn't hate you," Julia replied gently. "She hates that you're not under her control anymore." Her words settled deep into me, a truth I could no longer deny. From then on, Rachel's war was waged in the open. The legal battles escalated. She tried to drag my doctor into the fight, pressing for a statement, questioning my capacity. He refused, bless him, but still the damage spread. People began to look at Julia as though she were a thief hiding in plain sight. And through it all, Julia never faltered. She never defended herself, never begged me to protect her. She simply stayed. She refilled my pill organizer, prepared meals bland enough for my fragile stomach, sat beside me in the dark when nausea racked my body. She gave, without expectation, while Rachel took even in her absence. The cancer spread faster than anyone had anticipated. My body grew thinner, my strength weaker. The simplest tasks, bathing, brushing my hair, standing, became small victories. But Julia treated me with the same dignity on my frailest days as she had when I could still walk to the mailbox. Her presence was my anchor, even as Rachel tried to sever the rope. The storm was no longer just in whispers or accusations. It was written in legal filings, carried in the gossip of neighbors, etched into the cautious glances of strangers. Rachel was determined to erase Julia, but I was just as determined to hold her close. And in that tug of war, I realized something powerful. I was no longer fighting to be loved by my daughter. I was fighting to be respected by myself. There comes a moment when silence can no longer protect you, when the truth rips through years of restraint and forces its way into the open. That moment arrived in my living room, carried on the sharp slam of a door in the storm of my daughter's fury. If you've ever reached the breaking point with someone you love, keep listening. And if my story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because no one should walk through storms like this alone. Rachel didn't knock. She never did. The front door burst open, her footsteps fast, deliberate, rattling the walls with their intensity. Julia had just stepped out to run an errand, so it was only me on the couch, a blanket over my frail legs, a cup of tea trembling in my hands. "Where is she?" Rachel demanded, her voice sharp, her eyes flashing. "Rachel, calm down," I said, forcing myself upright. "Julia isn't here." Her chest rose and fell in furious rhythm. "Good, because if I see her here again, I swear to God, Mom." "This is not your house," I interrupted, my voice quieter than hers but steady enough to stop her cold. Her face twisted, confusion and rage colliding. "What did you just say?" "You don't live here," I said firmly. "You don't get to barge in. You don't get to threaten anyone." "I'm not threatening her," she hissed. "I'm protecting you." "From who?" I asked. My voice shook, but not from weakness. "From the only person who hasn't abandoned me in months?" Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing into slits. "She's using you." I stood slowly, my body trembling, but my words sharp. "No, Rachel. She's caring for me. Something you stopped doing a long time ago." It struck her like a slap. She staggered a step back, blinking hard as if my words had landed where nothing else ever could. "You come here like a storm," I continued, my voice low, each word cut from stone. "You throw accusations, spread lies, and now you want to drive away the person who saved me. She may not be blood, but she is family." Her eyes filled, not with sorrow, but with rage so raw it gleamed like glass. "You don't mean that," she whispered, her voice trembling. But I did. Part of me always had. Rachel's gaze darted around the room, the framed photos of Ethan and Lily, the quilt Julia had found at a thrift shop, the neat stack of medical papers Julia had organized. For the first time, I saw it in her eyes. This wasn't her home anymore. She was an intruder in a life she had chosen to abandon. "You'll regret this," she spat. Then she spun toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, and disappeared into the night. I sank back into the couch, my heart hammering, my body shaking with the force of what had just unfolded. Julia returned minutes later, carrying grocery bags, her face instantly reading the storm that lingered in the room. She set the bags down and crossed to me. "She was here," I whispered. Julia didn't ask what had been said. She didn't need to. She sat beside me, her quiet presence anchoring me back to the earth. Later that night, as the house grew still, I confessed what had been clawing at me for years. "She always said I was the strong one," I murmured, staring at my trembling hands. "You are," Julia said softly. "You just forgot that strength can say no too." Her words settled into me like balm, soothing the wounds Rachel had torn open. But the storm was not finished. Days later, a call came from Thomas Grant. His tone was measured, but I heard the weight behind his words. "Your daughter came to my office," he said. "She pressed for information about your will. I didn't disclose anything, but she's suspicious. She's angry." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. The line had been drawn clearer than ever. Rachel knew she no longer held the control she had always assumed was hers. Soon, whispers turned to war cries. Neighbors repeated Rachel's accusations. The nurse is living there full-time. Helen gave her everything. Poor Rachel, after all she's done for her mother. The pity was not for me, it was for the daughter who had treated me like a convenience and now wanted sympathy for being cut off. Julia bore the brunt of it. She stopped going out front, stopped chatting with anyone beyond the walls of our house. One night, I caught her crying quietly in the laundry room, her hand pressed against her eyes. "I should leave," she whispered when I found her. "If I go, maybe she'll stop. Maybe the kids will come back." "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the force in my voice. "She's the one who needs to leave, not you." Julia's tears shimmered, but she nodded. Still, I saw the way she pulled inward after that, protecting her heart. Rachel's war wasn't only against me, it was against anyone who dared to give me the love she refused to. The house grew quieter. Ethan and Lily still came, but their visits were tinged with hesitation, their young eyes shadowed with the weight of their mother's words. I could feel Rachel trying to wedge herself between us, poisoning even the purest bonds I had left. One evening, Ethan sat beside me on the porch, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom says Julia's stealing our house." The words nearly broke me. I forced my voice steady. "Julia isn't stealing anything, sweetheart. She's taking care of me." He looked down, silent, as if unsure who to believe. And in that silence, I realized Rachel's battle was working. I turned to the horizon, the sky burning gold as the sun sank behind the trees. For decades, I had swallowed words, sacrificed myself, begged for scraps of love. Not anymore. Rachel could fight with lies, with lawsuits, with poison slipped into ears. But I had something stronger: truth and the courage to finally speak it. The storm was reaching its peak, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand in the center of it without bowing my head. By late summer, my body had become a stranger to me. The mirror reflected someone thin, frail, with skin tinted by too much medication and too little strength. The simplest victories, brushing my hair, sitting upright without gasping, felt like small battles won against time. But through every collapse, every wave of nausea, Julia remained constant. She didn't flinch when my legs gave out. She didn't look away when sickness hollowed my face. She held me with the same steadiness, whether I was strong enough to stand or too weak to lift a spoon. The grandchildren came less often. Rachel rarely brought them anymore, though sometimes Ethan and Lily would appear on their bikes, slipping through the back gate like secrets. They sat beside me on the porch, their silence more comforting than any words. One afternoon, Lily handed me a drawing she'd made. Two smiling women holding hands, labeled in crayon, my two grandmas. The paper trembled in my fingers as tears spilled freely. Julia knelt beside me, her arms around my shoulders, her own eyes glistening. For the first time in months, I cried not from pain, but from love. It was a fragile piece, but Rachel couldn't allow even that. Her war shifted from whispers to full assault. Legal letters multiplied. She accused Julia of isolating me, manipulating me, of poisoning the family. My lawyer reassured me Rachel had no case, but reassurance couldn't quiet the storm she carried into every corner of my life. The neighbors eyed Julia with suspicion, relatives repeated Rachel's stories, and even the children carried doubt in their eyes. Then one Sunday morning, the air changed. Rachel arrived without her usual armor, no designer bag, no sharp sunglasses, no mask of control. She stood in the doorway with only a small, weathered envelope in her hands. Julia was in the backyard when Rachel crossed the room and placed the envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked, my voice faint. "A letter," she said, "from Dad. I found it after he died. I never told you." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Daniel's handwriting sprawled across the page, harsh yet familiar. In it, he confessed what I had always known, that his anger had been cruelty, that my leaving was not betrayal but survival, that I had saved myself and Rachel by walking away. At the end, he pleaded with her to forgive me. Tears blurred the words as I finished reading. Rachel stood still, her face pale, her eyes wet. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I blamed you because it was easier than blaming him. And then I just never stopped." Her words cut deeper than any accusation ever had. For the first time, I heard not rage, not entitlement, but sorrow. "And now, I asked quietly. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Now I know I failed you." Silence filled the room, not heavy this time, but fragile, like glass balancing on the edge of a table. Julia returned just then, pausing at the doorway when she saw Rachel's tears. Rachel turned to her, her voice unsteady. "I was wrong about you. I let pride poison everything. I let fear control me. I hurt you when all you did was help." Julia's expression remained calm, unreadable, but she nodded once, no gloating, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Rachel turned back to me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect the house or the will or even a place back in your life. I just had to say it." For the first time, I believed her. I reached for her hand, thin and trembling like my own. "I don't hate you, Rachel, but I can't pretend we're the same as before." She nodded slowly. "I know." She left soon after quietly, without drama or slammed the doors. Just silence, the kind that felt less like war and more like the closing of a long, painful chapter. That evening, Julia sat with me that as the sun bled gold behind the trees. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm tired," I admitted. Not just from illness, but from decades of carrying unspoken truths, of begging for love where it was rationed like currency. Julia placed her hand over mine, her warmth steady. I thought about the letter from Daniel, about Rachel's broken confession, about the crayon drawing still pinned to the fridge. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a door swinging open. It was a lock clicking loose inside my chest. The war wasn't over, but something had shifted. The storm had lost some of its power. And in the fragile space left behind, a new possibility began to grow. Not perfect reconciliation, not erasure of the past, but something quieter, something that felt like freedom. The autumn air carried both chill and clarity. Each day felt borrowed, every sunrise a fragile gift. My body was giving way, but my mind remained sharp enough to savor the small mercies, the warmth of a blanket, the sweetness of tea, the quiet rhythm of Julia's footsteps in the house. The letter from Daniel had loosened something inside me, but it had also left me raw. Rachel's visit lingered in my thoughts, her words replaying like a broken hymn. She had admitted her failures, but confession did not erase years of neglect. Forgiveness was not erasure. It was choosing peace over poison. Julia never pressed me about it. She simply carried on, steady, present, patient. Her kindness was not loud or performative. It lived in the smallest details. She tied my hair when I was too weak. She warmed the towels in the dryer before draping them over my shoulders. She hummed softly while washing dishes as though to remind me the world still carried music. One evening when the pain clawed deep, I whispered, "Promise me something." She set down the mug she was holding and turned to me. "Anything. Promise me you'll stay in this house when I'm gone. Don't let Rachel chase you away. This is your home now, too." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I promise." The legal battle continued on paper, but I no longer carried its weight. Thomas handled the filings, the counters, the endless motions. Rachel still fought, but her energy seemed fueled less by anger now and more by desperation. Perhaps she had realized she could not win. Perhaps she simply could not bear losing. The children visited again near the end. Ethan carried his backpack. Lily clutched another drawing. They sat beside me quietly, their young eyes heavy with things they couldn't name. Lily rested her head on my shoulder, whispering, "Mom's mad, but I love you, Nana." I kissed the crown of her hair, breathing in the faint scent of crayons and sunshine. "I love you too, more than anything." That night, when they left, I wept. Julia held me without words, her embrace steady as the ground itself. As the days shortened, so did my strength. The cancer claimed more of me each hour, but I was not afraid. I had faced storms, endured betrayals, raised children in shadows, and finally chosen my truth. Now, as I lay in my bed with the evening light fading, I felt ready. I asked Julia to bring me the photo album. She opened it gently, turning pages filled with decades of faces, laughter, milestones. My eyes lingered not on the weddings or graduations, but on the candid moments. Rachel asleep on my chest as a baby, Ethan grinning with cake smeared across his cheeks, Lily twirling in the yard with wildflowers in her hands. "These are enough," I whispered. Julia squeezed my hand. "They're beautiful." "Yes," I said softly. Even when it hurt, it was still beautiful. The last document I signed in was not a will or a petition, but a letter. I wrote it in my uneven hand, each word carved from the marrow of my truth. It was addressed to Rachel. "I cannot give you what you demand, but I can give you this. I loved you, even when you could not love me back in the way I needed. My choice was never about punishment. It was about dignity. Remember me not as someone who failed you, but as someone who finally chose herself." I sealed the letter and placed it in Thomas's care. My truth was written. My voice would not disappear. On my final evening, the house was filled with quiet. Julia sat by my side, reading aloud softly from a book I could no longer follow. Her voice was steady, her presence an anchor against the tide. As sleep pulled me deeper, I whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Her fingers brushed my forehead gently. "Always." And then, with peace at last, I let go. The house stood still, but it was no longer heavy with silence. It carried echoes of laughter, of battles fought, of love finally found. My legacy was not the house, the savings, or the possessions. It was the truth I left behind. That love is not measured by obligation, but by presence, not by blood, but by kindness. And if my story has touched you, if you've seen your own pain or your own hope reflected here, I ask you to carry it forward. Share it, hold it close, let it remind you that you are worthy of love that honors you. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we keep the truth alive.